It was a bright, bustling morning at Ninoano International Airport, with travelers hurrying to catch their flights amid the chatter of announcements and the hum of rolling luggage. Isabel bustled through the gate area in her crisp uniform. Her navy blue blazer was perfectly pressed, and the golden insignia on her lapel gleamed as she helped passengers with their pre-flight queries. Isabel had been with the airline for over a decade, starting as a flight attendant and working her way up to where she was now, a quiet but powerful presence at the helm of the company. Though her role as CEO kept her behind the scenes, she still loved stepping into her old uniform to connect with her crew and passengers. Today was one of those rare days. As she greeted passengers at the boarding gate, her warm smile and polite demeanor stood in stark contrast to a group of wealthy passengers lingering near the VIP lounge. Their voices carried over the buzz of the terminal. "Did you see that flight attendant? So eager to please," one of them sneered, pointing at Isabel as she walked by. "Must be desperate for tips," another added, chuckling. Isabel overheard the comments but remained unfazed. Her years of experience had taught her to handle rude remarks with grace. For her, the priority was ensuring everyone had a safe and comfortable journey. Soon, the group of passengers boarded the flight, their entitled attitudes evident in how they waved off instructions from the cabin crew and demanded immediate attention. As the lead flight attendant for the day, Isabel kept a close eye on them, ensuring their behavior didn't disrupt the other passengers. Inside the aircraft, the group's behavior escalated. One of them snapped his fingers at a younger crew member who was serving drinks. "Hey, tell your supervisor I need more ice in my champagne," he said dismissively. Isabel stepped in calmly. "Sir, is there anything I can assist you with?" The man looked her up and down, his lip curling in disdain. "Yeah, get me someone who actually speaks proper English," he retorted, laughing with his friends. The young crew member behind Isabel looked flustered, but Isabel placed a reassuring hand on her arm before turning back to the man. "Of course, sir," she replied smoothly, her poise unwavering. "Let me take care of that for you." As she walked away to fetch the ice, she heard one of the passengers mutter, "What do you expect from a Filipina flight attendant? They're all the same, just here to serve." Isabel clenched her jaw but kept walking, determined not to let their words affect her. Little did they know, this was far from an ordinary flight, and they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The plane hummed softly as it soared through the skies. Most passengers were settled in their seats, enjoying their in-flight meals or scrolling through their devices. But the group of wealthy passengers in business class seemed determined to make their presence known. One of the men, wearing an expensive watch that gleamed under the cabin lights, leaned back in his seat and smirked. "Hey, stewardess!" he called out loudly, snapping his fingers. His voice cut through the tranquil atmosphere, drawing uneasy glances from nearby passengers. Isabel approached with her signature calm. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" The man gestured dismissively at his meal tray. "This chicken is dry. Do you have anything better, or is this the best you people can manage?" His tone dripped with arrogance, and the phrase "you people" hung in the air like a slap. Isabel kept her expression neutral, but a flicker of annoyance crossed the face of another passenger seated nearby. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir," Isabel said, her voice steady. "Let me see what I can do to improve your meal experience." Another member of the group chimed in, a woman draped in designer clothing. "And can you tell whoever designed this plane to get better seats? They're not as luxurious as I expected." "Oh, wait. You even understand what I'm saying, dear?" Her companions erupted in laughter, as if they'd made the cleverest joke. Isabel stood firm, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "I assure you, ma'am, we take all passenger feedback seriously," Isabel replied, her tone polite but unwavering. "Is there anything else you'd like assistance with?" The woman rolled her eyes. "Just don't mess up my order like last time." As Isabel walked away to fulfill their requests, the murmurs of their mocking continued behind her. "Why do they even hire these people?" one of the men sneered. "Cheap labor, I guess." Unbeknownst to the group, other passengers were taking notice of their behavior. A middle-aged couple in the row behind them exchanged uncomfortable glances, while a young man across the aisle discreetly recorded the scene on his phone. Meanwhile, in the galley, Isabel took a moment to collect herself. She wasn't new to rude passengers, but something about their condescension struck a chord. Still, she reminded herself of the lesson she'd learned early in her career. Composure was power. "Are you okay, ma'am?" one of the junior attendants asked hesitantly. Isabel smiled reassuringly. "I'm fine. Let's focus on making sure all passengers are cared for." Her calm demeanor didn't waver, but deep down, she knew that the group's arrogance would soon lead them to learn an important lesson, one that fate seemed to have perfectly orchestrated. The flight had reached cruising altitude, and most passengers were quietly immersed in their activities. The lights in the cabin dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for a calm stretch of the journey. Isabel was making her rounds, ensuring every passenger's needs were met, when suddenly a loud thud came from the business class cabin. A man from the rude group, the one with the flashy watch, had collapsed in the aisle. His friends shot up from their seats in a panic. "Somebody help," one of them yelled. "He's not breathing." The cabin erupted into chaos as passengers craned their necks to see what had happened. The attendant sprang into action, but Isabel moved the quickest. She immediately knelt beside the man, her voice calm and authoritative. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said gently, patting his shoulder. The man's face was pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. One of his companions panicked. "Do something. Don't just sit there." Isabel ignored the outburst and quickly assessed the situation. She checked his pulse and noted his shallow breathing. Years of training had prepared her for this moment. Call for medical assistance on board and retrieve the first aid kit, Isabel instructed one of the junior attendants. Then she turned to the group. "Is he on any medication? Does he have any medical conditions we should know about?" The group exchanged frantic looks, their earlier arrogance now replaced with fear. I don't know," one stammered. "He's never mentioned anything like this." The tension in the cabin grew thick as Isabel worked swiftly. Passengers looked on, whispering among themselves, some shocked at how calm she remained despite the chaos. Moments later, an oxygen mask was secured over the man's face, and Isabel carefully adjusted the flow. Another attendant arrived with the first aid kit, but Isabel already seemed to have the situation under control. "We need to keep him stable until we can determine his condition," she said. Suddenly, a passenger from economy class stepped forward. "I'm a doctor. Can I assist?" Isabel looked up and nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Please." The doctor knelt beside her and examined the man. After a few moments, he looked at Isabel, visibly impressed. "You've done everything right so far. He's lucky to have someone so well trained on board." The words carried a weight that wasn't lost on the group. Their eyes darted between Isabel and their unconscious friend. The realization dawning that the flight attendant they had mocked might just have saved his life. As the doctor and Isabel worked together to stabilize the passenger, the rest of the cabin fell silent. The air, once filled with tension, now carried a sense of respect and admiration for the calm professionalism on display. Eventually, The man's condition stabilized. He was still pale but breathing steadily, his head supported by pillows Isabel had carefully arranged. "Thank you," one of his friends said to Isabel, his voice trembling. The arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by humility. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Isabel gave a small nod, her expression soft but composed. "It's my responsibility to ensure the safety of every passenger." As she stood and adjusted her uniform, Isabel caught the eye of another passenger who had witnessed the entire scene. The man gave her a subtle thumbs up, and she responded with a faint smile. Little did the passengers know, the day's surprises weren't over yet. As the flight continued, the tension from the earlier incident began to ease. The once arrogant group of passengers sat quietly now, their earlier bravado replaced with gratitude and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. The man who had collapsed was stable, thanks to Isabel and the doctor, and the rest of the crew worked diligently to maintain a calm atmosphere. Isabel returned to the galley to check on her team and gather her thoughts. She adjusted her blazer and took a deep breath, knowing that moments like these were what defined her career. But as she prepared to resume her rounds, a junior attendant approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am Isabel," she whispered, "one of the passengers asked for you specifically. They're inquiring about your position." Isabel arched an eyebrow but nodded. "Let me handle it," she said, stepping out into the cabin. In business class, the group of wealthy passengers had gathered around their friend's seat, still visibly shaken. One of them, the woman in designer clothes who had mocked Isabel earlier, gestured for her to come over. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice softer now. "We wanted to say thank you for what you did. I don't know how you stayed so calm. Are you always this composed?" Isabel smiled politely. "It's part of the training. We prepare for all kinds of situations to ensure passenger safety." "But how?" Another chimed in, a man who had been one of the loudest critics earlier. "You seem different, like you've done more than just training. What exactly do you do for this airline?" Isabel hesitated for a moment. She had never enjoyed drawing attention to herself, but something about the sincerity in their voices made her reconsider. "Let's just say I've been with this airline for a long time," she said, choosing her words carefully. The doctor, still seated nearby, overheard the exchange and chuckled. "You can be modest all you want, miss, but the rest of us saw it. That kind of composure and leadership doesn't come from just being a flight attendant." The group looked at each other, confused. "Wait," the woman said slowly. "You're not just a flight attendant." Isabel sighed gently and gave a small nod. "No, I'm not. I'm the CEO of this airline." The cabin went silent. The group stared at her, their jaws practically hitting the floor. Even passengers from other rows who overheard the revelation turned their heads in disbelief. "You're what?" the woman stammered, her face pale. Isabel folded her hands in front of her, her voice calm and measured. "I started as a flight attendant many years ago. I worked my way up through different roles until I became CEO. I step into this role from time to time to stay connected with the team and understand what's happening on the front lines." The weight of her words settled heavily over the group. The very person they had ridiculed for her accent and demeanor was not just a part of the crew. She was the leader of the entire airline. One of the men in the group broke the silence. "We had no idea. I mean, you were so humble." Isabel smiled faintly. "There's no room for pride when it comes to serving others," she said. The group fell quiet, their earlier arrogance now completely replaced with a mix of embarrassment and respect. Around them, other passengers exchanged murmurs of admiration for Isabel's humility and leadership. "You've taught us a lot today," the woman admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. "We misjudged you, and we're truly sorry." Isabel nodded graciously. "Apologies are appreciated, but the real change happens when we learn from these moments. Respect isn't earned by rank or title. It's earned through action and kindness." As she turned to walk away, Isabel couldn't help but notice the ripple effect her revelation had on the cabin. The passengers, once divided by status and misunderstanding, seemed to come together in quiet reflection. The group of passengers sat in stunned silence, their earlier smugness completely gone. The man who had collapsed was now stable, reclining in his seat and quietly thanking Isabel for saving his life. The woman in designer clothes, who had been the loudest critic, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on the cabin floor. One of the men finally broke the silence. "I can't believe we treated her like that," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's not just a CEO. She's the reason our friend is still alive." The woman sighed heavily. "We've been so blind," she admitted. "All this time we thought status and money were everything. But she showed us what true leadership looks like." Another man chimed in, his voice tinged with guilt. "It's not just about leadership. It's about respect. We didn't even think to treat her like a human being." Their words were overheard by nearby passengers, who nodded in agreement. One of them, an older man seated in the row behind, leaned forward. "You know," he said softly, "it's never too late to learn a lesson in humility. She's given you a gift, one you shouldn't waste." The group exchanged glances, their faces flushed with shame. Finally, the woman in designer clothes stood up and walked to the galley, where Isabel was preparing coffee for the crew. She hesitated for a moment, wringing her hands before clearing her throat. "Miss Isabel," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Isabel turned, her expression calm but curious. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" I wanted to apologize," the woman said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We were rude, dismissive, and downright awful to you. And despite all that, you saved our friend's life and treated us with kindness. I'm so sorry for how we acted." Isabel studied her for a moment, then offered a kind smile. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It's not easy to admit when we've made mistakes, but the important thing is what we learn from them." The rest of the group approached, nodding in agreement. One by one, they echoed the woman's apology, each admitting their regret for how they had treated her. Isabel listened patiently, her demeanor gracious as always. "I appreciate your words," she said, "but remember, it's not about me. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their role or background." The group nodded solemnly, her words striking a chord. As they returned to their seats, their attitudes were noticeably different. They thanked the crew members who passed by, smiled politely at fellow passengers, and even struck up a friendly conversation with the doctor who had assisted earlier. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Other passengers watched the group's newfound humility with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Isabel continued her duties, her calm professionalism unchanged. But deep down, she felt a sense of satisfaction, not because she had revealed her position, but because the lessons she had hoped to impart seemed to have resonated. As the flight neared its destination, the once divided cabin now felt unified. The wealthy passengers, humbled by their experience, seemed genuinely transformed. The plane began its descent, and the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin. Outside, the skyline of their destination city was coming into view. Passengers fastened their seat belts and tidied up their trays, But the atmosphere in business class was distinctly different from what it had been at the start of the flight. The group of wealthy passengers, who had been the source of mockery and tension earlier, now sat quietly, their eyes reflecting a mix of humility and introspection. The woman in designer clothes turned to her companions, her voice low but filled with resolve. "I think we owe her more than just an apology," she said, her tone serious. "We need to do something to show that we've truly learned from this." One of the men nodded. "I agree. She didn't have to treat us with such kindness after how we acted, but she did. That's real class." The group huddled together, whispering as they tried to come up with a plan. Their transformation wasn't just surface level anymore. It was genuine. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, thanking the passengers for flying with the airline. Applause filled the cabin, a common tradition for a successful landing. But in business class, the claps carried an extra weight. They were directed at someone specific. Isabel, walking through the aisle to check on passengers before disembarkation, stopped in her tracks when she saw the group standing and waiting for her. The woman in designer clothes stepped forward, clutching a small card in her hand. "Miss Isabel," she began, her voice steady but emotional, "before we leave, we want to thank you again. Not just for saving our friend, but for teaching us something we'll never forget." She handed Isabel the card. It was a handwritten note, carefully crafted, expressing their gratitude and acknowledging their mistakes. Inside, there was also a receipt for a significant donation they had made to a charity that supported Filipino workers in the aviation industry. Isabel opened the card and read it quietly. A soft smile spread across her face, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked up at the group, her eyes warm. "Thank you," she said simply, not just for the gesture, but for taking this experience to heart. "It means more than you know." The group nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and gratitude. One of the men stepped forward. "You've shown us that leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about how you treat people. That's a lesson we'll carry with us." Around them, other passengers watched the exchange with admiration. Some even approached Isabel to thank her for her service and composure during the flight. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted completely, leaving an impression of unity and shared humanity. Passengers began to disembark. Isabel stood at the door with her usual warm smile, bidding everyone goodbye. But this time, the thank you she received felt different, genuine, heartfelt, and filled with respect. As the passengers exited, the group of wealthy travelers was among the last to leave. They paused at the door, turning back to Isabel one final time. The man who had collapsed extended his hand, his face sincere. "Thank you again, Miss Isabel," he said softly. "You didn't just save my life. You opened our eyes to what matters." Isabel shook his hand warmly. "Take care of yourself," she replied. "And remember, every day is an opportunity to treat others with kindness." The woman in designer clothes hesitated before stepping forward. "I don't know if you'll remember us," she said, her voice tinged with guilt, "but we'll never forget you. Thank you for your patience and grace. You've inspired us to be better." Isabel gave her a small smile. "It's never too late to start," she said gently. The group exited the plane, leaving behind a cabin full of passengers who had witnessed the remarkable transformation. As Isabel glanced out at the terminal, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow on the bustling airport. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, not because of her title, but because of the change she had seen in those passengers. Her story is a powerful reminder that true strength lies not in titles or power, but in compassion, humility, and respect. If you believe in the power of kindness to transform lives, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to support more inspiring stories. Together, we can create a world where everyone treats each other with dignity and respect.